got it. After 40 years of wandering through the wilderness, the Jewish people finally reached the land of Israel. And they gazed upon the beautiful apple orchards and orange groves and vineyards and fields of billowing wheat, and it was an absolutely exquisite sight. But it was a strange sight as well, especially for those Israelites who had been born in the desert, because all they had ever seen for their entire lives was sand and rocks and very sparse vegetation. But now they were in a beautiful, flourishing, fertile land, Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, a land flowing with milk and honey. And when they finally arrived, one boy looked up at his mother and he said, "Wow, I've never seen anything quite like this place before. What are all these things that we're looking at in this beautiful new land?" And the mother thought back and she remembered all the stories that her own mother had told her about the vegetation and the trees that were part of their daily life in Egypt. And so she said to her son, "See those big brown wooden pillars over there? Those are called trees. And the beautiful round fruit hanging from the trees, those are called apples and oranges. They taste sweet and delicious. And see that billowing grain? That's called wheat. We grind it up and we bake it in an oven and it becomes bread." And the boy was absolutely astounded. "Wow," he said, "it was so considerate of God to put all of those trees and sheaves of grain in the ground so that we would have food to eat." "Well, actually," the boy's mother said, "that's really not exactly how it works." And then she grabbed his pinky finger and she said, "You see your little fingernail? Well, a farmer takes a seed that is smaller than the nail on your pinky, and he plants that seed in the ground, and with water and sunshine and time, the trees and the wheat grow tall from that tiny little seed, and then we harvest the produce." And the boy looked at his mother incredulously, and he said, "It's really not nice to trick your son in that way. I don't believe a word you just told me. I know that God turned the Nile to blood when we were in Egypt, and I know that God split the Red Sea and we walked on dry land to freedom, and I know that God revealed his presence on Mount Sinai to our people at the moment he gave us the Torah. And I believe all of those things to be true, but you can never convince me that big, beautiful trees and fruit and stalks of wheat all sprout from tiny little seeds that are smaller than my fingernail. That is too great of a miracle for even me to believe." And what's the miracle of Hanukkah? We all know the story well. When the Maccabees recaptured the temple from the Syrian Greeks, they found one cruse of oil that was supposed to light the menorah for one day, but miraculously, the light lasted for 8 days. And our tradition frames the miracle of Hanukkah as being a great miracle, right? The letters on the dreidel are Nun, Gimel, Hey, and Shin. Nes Gadol Haya Sham. A great miracle happened there. Or, if you're in Israel, Nes Gadol Haya Po. A great miracle happened here. But if you really stop to think about the miracle of Hanukkah, even just for a moment, you'll recognize pretty quickly that it's not such a great miracle. God creating the heavens and the earth, that was a great miracle. God bringing the 10 plagues down upon the Egyptians, that was a great miracle. God stopping the sun in the sky, as we read about in the book of Joshua, that was a great miracle. But God making a little bit of oil last for 8 days, Don't get me wrong, it was a miracle, but was it a great miracle? I'm not so sure. But maybe that's precisely the point. Maybe that's really the very essence of Hanukkah. By framing the miracle of the oil, a relatively minor miracle in the grand scheme of things, as being a great miracle, I think our tradition is pushing us to see even the smallest miracles in our lives as being great. Many of you here this morning were in the class that I've been teaching on the life and thought of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, which concluded just this past Thursday. And one of the key themes of Heschel's philosophy is the notion of what he calls radical amazement, striving to experience the world via a disposition of wonder and sensing the sublime in even the most mundane of experiences. As Heschel writes in his book, Man is Not Alone, some people sense the ineffable or the sublime quality of existence only at distant intervals, in extraordinary events. But others sense it in ordinary events, in every fold, in every nook, day after day, hour after hour. They hear the stillness that crowds the world in spite of our noise, in spite of our greed. Slight and simple as they may be, a piece of paper, a morsel of bread, a word, a sigh, they hide and guard a never-ending secret, a glimpse of God. And that's precisely what I think happened with the miracle of the oil. Not a full-fledged revelation of God's presence as we experienced at Sinai, but rather a mere glimpse of God. But that was enough to make the miracle great. And by the way, that's exactly the kind of miracle we read about in this morning's Torah portion. In this morning's parashah, Miketz, we read of Pharaoh's two dreams. The first dream of 7 healthy cows grazing by the Nile when they are swallowed by 7 thin cows, and the second dream of 7 healthy ears of grain being consumed by 7 parched ears of grain. And desperate to understand what these dreams meant, Pharaoh summons Joseph, the dream interpreter, from prison, and Joseph tells Pharaoh that those 2 dreams are actually one. Egypt is about to experience 7 years of flourishing and abundance, immediately followed by 7 years of suffering and famine. But was Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's 2 dreams really a miracle? Throughout history, and especially since the time of Freud, there have been thousands of books written about the art of dream interpretation. It's a skill. It's something that really anybody can learn how to do, and most significantly, it was something that was very commonly practiced in ancient Egypt. In fact, there's an ancient Egyptian papyrus, and Bob and Maddie, maybe you saw it on your most recent trip, that dates back to the 13th century BCE, which features common symbols found in dreams, and it indicates whether or not those symbols are good omens or bad omens. So maybe Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams was a miracle, or maybe it's something he just learned how to do. And if it was a miracle, it was probably, I think we can all agree, a relatively minor miracle. Or, to take a bit of a different point of view, maybe Joseph's interpretation truly was miraculous, because the rabbis of the Talmud teach that dreams are 1/60th of prophecy. So, according to our tradition, when Joseph interpreted those dreams, he was in fact interpreting the will of God, even if it was just a glimpse of God, as Abraham Joshua Heschel might have put it. And that minor miracle had major ramifications for the history of our people. Pharaoh was so impressed by Joseph's interpretation that he appointed him to be the vizier, the second most powerful man in Egypt, which of course is what led directly to the Israelites coming down to Egypt. In other words, Joseph's interpretation of Pharaoh's dreams was a key, critical turning point in the history of the Jewish people, and that is more than enough to make it a great miracle. And what's the true miracle, the greatest miracle of all? The fact that we are sitting in this room right now, at this moment, talking about Hanukkah, something that happened over 2,000 years ago, and the story of Joseph, which happened over 3,000 years ago. When you think about everything that has been done to the Jewish people to ensure that we couldn't pray, or that we couldn't study Torah, or that we couldn't light the Hanukkah candles, and yet we are still here. That is a much greater miracle than the oil lasting for 8 days. And yet it's a miracle we don't think about often enough. We don't dwell upon often enough. We don't celebrate nearly often enough. Most of us don't think about the miraculous existence of the Jewish people every time we walk in the doors of this synagogue. And yet there is no greater miracle than the fact that we are still here. And so as we enter the final days of Hanukkah, let's strive to see the miraculous in the seemingly mundane. As Whitman once wrote, "Who makes much of a miracle? As to me, I know of nothing but miracles. Whether I walk the streets of Manhattan, or dart my sight over the roofs of houses towards the sky, or wade with naked feet along the beach just at the edge of the water, or stand under trees in the woods, to me, every hour of the light and dark is a miracle. Every cubic inch of space is a miracle." The fact that a mighty tree can grow from the smallest of seeds, that is a great miracle. Simply being able to light the Hanukkah candles with your family every night, that is a great miracle. That on an absolutely frigid day like today, we have a roof over our heads and a heating system that keeps us warm, that's a great miracle. And of course, the fact that we are still here after thousands of years and we are still celebrating, that is the greatest miracle of all. Shabbat Shalom and Chanukah Sameach.